In 2019, I moved to Lawrence, Kansas. At the time, I was around 20 years old. I had left college halfway through because I couldn't afford it anymore. I didn't want to move back to my parents' house, so I started looking for a small, cheap apartment, somewhere I could live alone and work. Most places were too expensive, especially for someone like me who was only working part-time at a local bookstore. Then, one evening, I checked Craigslist. There was a listing that caught my eye. The owner sounded old, but friendly. His name was Walter. He asked if I could come see the place the next morning. The apartment was behind a small thrift store on a quiet street. The building looked old, maybe built in the 1960s. It had 2 apartments upstairs, and 1 small unit on the ground floor. That was the one Walter was renting. Walter himself looked to be around 55 or 60. He was a thin man with a pale face, gray hair, and a generally unkempt appearance. But he was polite, soft-spoken, and didn't ask me too many questions. He told me the last tenant had left suddenly a few weeks ago, but hadn't caused any problems. The place was small, just 1 room with a tiny kitchen attached, a bathroom, and thick walls with small windows. The rent was low, and it was all I could afford at the time. So, without thinking too much, I said yes. 2 days later, I moved in with just 2 bags and a second-hand mattress. The first week went by normally. I was working evening shifts at the bookstore. I'd come home late, eat something, and go to sleep. The street was always quiet. I didn't see many people around, and the place felt peaceful. But soon, I started noticing small things. There was a door in the corner of my kitchen. It looked like a regular storage room door. But when I opened it once, I saw narrow wooden stairs going down into the dark. Walter hadn't mentioned it during the visit. Old buildings usually have basements, and I figured it was just for storing junk. I closed the door and didn't think about it again. But around the second week, I started hearing soft sounds at night. Nothing loud or scary, just faint thuds or the creaking of the floorboards. They always seemed to come from the kitchen side. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Or maybe the sounds were coming from the street outside. But it happened more than once. I told myself it was probably rats, or just the usual sounds old buildings make. Still, something felt off. Deep down, I knew it. I didn't want to go down there. But at the same time, I didn't like the idea of not knowing what was underneath me. That feeling stuck with me for days. Then, one evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the basement door. The door I had ignored for days, now I couldn't avoid it anymore. I needed to see what was down there. I needed to know. So, I grabbed my phone to use as a light and slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open with a faint sound. I stood there for a long moment, listening hard, but there was nothing. Just silence. So, I placed my foot on the first step, and slowly started walking down. At first, it looked like no one had been down there in years. Dust was everywhere. The space was small and enclosed. But then I saw something that didn't fit. On the far wall, cleaner than the rest of the basement, was a large wooden board. And when my light hit it properly, I froze. It was a map. A hand-drawn map of my apartment. There were no words, no names, no notes, just lines drawn in black marker. The shape of the walls. The position of the doors. The windows. Even the small things, like my bed, my shelf near the window, and my chair by the kitchen. It wasn't messy or rushed. It was detailed. I mean, too detailed. I slowly turned my light around the basement again, now noticing things I hadn't seen before. Small footprints in the dust. Not many. But fresh enough. The marks of someone walking through here. Carefully, I turned and climbed the stairs, faster than I thought I could. I shut the door, locked it, and pushed a chair in front of it. Then I stood there for a while, just staring at that door. That night, I didn't sleep. But it wasn't just fear. The thought that someone had been watching me, that was what kept me up. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't feel safe staying there anymore. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I decided to call the police. But before I did, I packed up my important things and left the apartment. Then I sat in a small coffee shop down the street and called the non-emergency police number. They sent 2 officers within an hour. I met them outside the building. One of the officers asked me to explain everything. While he stayed with me, the other went down into the basement. About 10 minutes later, he came back up. His face was serious. He asked me to wait outside. Later, one of them explained what they had found. The map wasn't the only thing down there. Behind some old crates, they found a small bag. Inside were items that didn't belong to me, an old phone, a set of keys, a woman's scarf, and small personal items like a bracelet. It looked like someone had been watching the previous tenants, maybe even entering the apartments when people weren't home. They didn't know how long it had been going on. There was a narrow section in the basement wall, broken through. A small gap led into a crawl space beneath the building. From there, it would have been easy for someone to move around, reaching the back of the apartments without ever being seen. They didn't find anyone down there, but they told me not to stay in the apartment anymore. They said they'd contact the property owner, Walter, and begin an investigation. I stayed with a friend in the next town for a few days. Later, I returned during the day with a police officer to collect the rest of my things. Walter never contacted me. A few weeks later, I heard from someone in town that the apartment was still empty. The owner of the coffee shop told me the police had been coming around for days after that. Nobody said exactly what happened. But I didn't care. I moved to a new city and rented a small apartment in a newer building, with good security. In 2018, I was living in a small town called Milton, Oregon. Maybe you've never heard of it, most people haven't. I had moved there because I needed peace. Back then, I was around 26, fresh out of a hard year. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery, and life was simple. But I had one problem: I didn't have a car. And Milton wasn't the kind of place where you could just walk everywhere. Shops were far apart, and the buses only came twice a day. I needed something with wheels, anything affordable. One evening, I sat by my window and searched Craigslist on my phone. Most of the ads were junk, but one caught my attention. Old car for sale. Runs well. Take care of her. The photo showed a blue car with faded paint, standing alone in someone's yard. I called the number listed, and a man answered. He confirmed the car still worked and gave me his address. The next evening, I went to see it. The inside of the car was clean and smelled like old storage. Or maybe like books that had been sitting unopened for years. Then he handed me the keys and said, "Take care of the car." I gave him the money and drove off. For the next few days, everything was normal. Nothing strange happened. The heater worked. The brakes were good. And the engine sounded fine. After moving to a new place and constantly worrying about expenses, the car felt like one less problem to deal with. But that didn't last long. One night, after my shift at the hardware store, I got into the car and noticed something strange. The GPS screen was already on, and a route was set. The destination? A place simply labeled, warehouse. A straight line heading out of town, about 20 miles away. I pressed the clear button without thinking much of it. I figured it was just a leftover destination from the previous owner. But the next evening, the same thing happened. Same route. Same warehouse. I checked everything. The GPS wasn't connected to my phone. There was no saved address or recent search history. Yet, the route kept appearing. And then, it started happening every time I got into the car. After a few days, it got worse. The GPS began rerouting me in real time. No matter where I was going, it would start recalculating, always pointing me toward that warehouse. If I drove to the grocery store, it would direct me farther. If I visited the library, it would suggest a longer, unnecessary way back. Always, toward that same destination. Passing near the same old highway again and again, it started to feel like the car was trying to lead me somewhere. Out of curiosity, or maybe unease, I opened the map app on my phone and checked the location. The warehouse was far past the edge of town. Beyond the last gas station. Near the woods. One weekend, I stopped at a local grocery store near my apartment. It was quiet, almost no customers. Just the man behind the counter. While paying, I casually asked him about the warehouse. He looked at the map on my phone, longer than I expected. Then he said, "That place? Yeah, it's old. Been empty a long time." He paused, then added, "There was a guy. Tom. Used to live nearby. Drove a blue car. Went out to that warehouse almost every day." Then he looked at me. One day, he just stopped. No one really knows why. I didn't ask anything more. I just left. But after that, things got worse. The GPS didn't wait for me to start the car anymore. Some mornings, the screen would already be on, glowing in the dark, displaying the same route. Warehouse. Highway 12. 20 miles out of town. Even after unplugging it, the screen would flicker back on by itself. I started driving less. Stayed home more. But that feeling, it never left. Every time I looked out the window, the car was there. Just sitting. Waiting. Then, one evening, I found an envelope at my front door. Inside was a photo. A picture of my car, parked outside. Taken from behind. From close range. I hadn't heard anything that night. No sounds. No knocks. But I couldn't sleep. And by morning, I had made a decision. I had to end this. I got into tea. I didn't need the GPS anymore. I already knew the way. Highway 12 was narrow and quiet, with tall trees lining both sides of the road. There were no signs. No other cars. After 20 minutes, I saw it. The warehouse. An old gray building, standing alone in the middle of nowhere. The GPS screen went dark, like its job was finished. I stayed in the driver's seat for a while. Long enough to feel just how empty this place really was. Then, I stepped out of the car. The ground was dry and cracked. There were tire marks in the dirt, but none of them looked fresh. On the side of the building, a metal door stood slightly open. Not wide. Just enough to catch your eye. There was no real reason to go inside. But somehow, it felt worse to leave without looking. And then I saw him. In the corner of the warehouse. A man, standing completely still. It was the same man who sold me the car on Craigslist. The same old man from that house. He was watching me. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. But then it hit me. He had been following me. From the very first day. This wasn't random. He had planned everything. The GPS was never broken. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a coincidence. He had set it up. He had been controlling it all along. Every route it showed me, every time it pulled me toward the warehouse, it was him. I felt trapped. And then, he started walking toward me. His face was blank. No fear. No anger. No smile. Just quiet. Calm. Like he had done this before. He car, and I drove. I didn't want to find out what would happen next. I ran from the warehouse and drove back to my apartment, but something didn't feel right. The man hadn't stopped me. He hadn't even cared that I saw it. Sitting in the car, I noticed something small on the rearview mirror. A black dot. It was a hidden camera. I checked the car, and that's when I found more. Tiny cameras and microphones tucked under the dashboard, near the back seat by the radio. He had been recording me since the very first day. Watching me. Listening to everything I said. The warehouse? That was just a distraction. The real trap was the car. And now, he probably knew I had figured it out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man. How easy it was for him to choose me. How he'd planned everything from the start. I never saw him again. He didn't come back. The next day, I got rid of the car. I didn't sell it. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else going through what I did. I paid a mechanic to take it apart, completely. Every wire. Every camera. Gone. But even now, when I walk home at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone's still watching. I don't really believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, but I do enjoy thinking about those kinds of stories. They're fun to imagine. And what happened to me? Well, it feels like one of those strange stories people tell. This happened when I was in high school in Northern California. My best friend was having a family reunion, and I was invited to join. Around 9 p.m., the last of the family members arrived, but for some reason, they didn't bring their daughter with them. I still don't know why they left her behind, but they asked us to go and pick her up. Tizhan had just gotten his first car. And when you have your own car for the first time, every little thing feels like a good reason to go for a drive. The girl's house was about 2.5 hours away. They gave us money for gas, so we didn't think twice. We got into the car and started the drive. We played music, snacked, and just had a good time, like any normal road trip. After a long drive down the highway, we finally took the exit. Soon, we found ourselves in a small, quiet town surrounded by trees. Eventually, the radio started to cut out a little bit, so I turned it down. We didn't want to just listen to static. But this little dirt road just kept going on and on, to the point of absurdity. So, me and Tizhan started joking about who in the world would come out this far to build a house. Then, and this will stick with me for the rest of my life, this overpowering smell came into the car. It smelled like copper, so strong that it almost felt hard to breathe. Both of us felt like we were going to throw up. My stomach twisted because of how bad it was. The smell was so thick, it felt like you could almost touch it. But we kept driving. After a while, we reached a small wooden bridge, maybe about 20 feet long. As we crossed it, the bad smell slowly faded, and the radio started working again. Finally, we reached an open space with about 5 houses. As soon as we saw them, we started laughing. It felt so strange to drive all this way just to find these few little houses. Not only had someone built a house all the way out here, but they built 5 houses right in the middle of the woods. We kept asking ourselves, why would anyone do that? We picked up his cousin, Shai. Yes, that's really her name. As soon as she got in the car, I asked her about the strange smell we'd noticed on the way. But she looked confused. She said she'd never smelled anything like that before. Shai was about the same age as us, and we all liked the same kind of music. After a while, one of her favorite songs started playing. She asked us to turn up the volume, so we did. Now, it's almost midnight, and we're blasting music back down the absurdly long road, heading back the way we came. As expected, the radio started cutting out little by little. Then, the smell hit us again. But this time, it wasn't gradual. The smell hit again, like smacking into a wall made of pennies. I immediately turned to Shy and asked again, but she was absolutely disgusted. She assured us that this was not normal. But while she was still talking, we reached that small wooden bridge again. As we were driving over the bridge, the car suddenly stopped. I looked at Tizhan and asked him what he was doing. He quickly said, "It's not me," and even lifted his knee higher to show me that he was pressing the gas pedal. That's when I heard a scary sound. The tires were spinning, but not touching the ground properly. And then, the car slowly started lifting from the back. All of us quickly looked out the back window, but we couldn't see anything. It was just complete darkness behind us. Then suddenly, Tizhan shouted in panic. Right after that, the back of the car dropped down hard. The car jumped forward, and we almost crashed into a tree. But luckily, Tizhan quickly got control of the car again. We drove away from there as fast as we could. Very soon, the bad smell went away, and we were out of the forest, back on a normal paved road. The radio started working again, but the whole mood felt so wrong that I just turned it off. None of us felt like talking. We just drove down the empty highway in silence. When we finally reached a gas station, we all got out and went to check the back of the Tahoe. And there it was, a huge dent right in the center of the back. It covered almost the whole area. Then, finally, Tizhan broke the silence. He said, "I think I saw it." Shy answered right away, "I did too." I didn't see anything at all, but when I asked them what they saw, it was clear they didn't want to talk about it. Years later, I asked Tizhan about it again. He told me that, for a quick second, he thought he saw something with hooves in the side mirror. I'm a person who doesn't really believe in things like that. But at the same time, I have no idea what could have been strong enough to lift the back of a Tahoe. And honestly, I've told this story to many of my friends, and none of us have ever come up with a good logical answer for what happened that night. Even thinking about something paranormal doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, if something so powerful could lift a Tahoe, why would it just let us go? Sometimes, I wish I had gotten out of the car to see what it was. It's a question that has stayed in my mind my whole life, and I still don't know the answer. In 2021, I was living in Spokane, Washington. I was 22 years old, working part-time at a coffee shop, barely making enough to pay rent. Most nights after work, I would sit on my bed, scrolling through Craigslist, looking for quick jobs. Sometimes I found cleaning work, moving help, or even pet sitting. But that night, one ad caught my eye: house sitting needed for 1 week. The post said, "Small house, no pets, no cleaning required." It sounded too simple, but I didn't think much about it. I called the number listed, and a man picked up. He asked if I could come see the place the next afternoon. The next day, I took a bus to the address he gave me. The man was already standing outside waiting for me. He looked about 60 or maybe older. He introduced himself as Mr. Allen. He walked me through the house. The kitchen was small but clean. The living room had old furniture, a small TV, nothing expensive, nothing personal. The bedroom I would stay in was simple. A bed, a nightstand, and a small window looking out at the empty backyard. After showing me around, he handed me a small folded paper. I opened it, thinking it was a list of rules, but there was only one line written in clear handwriting: "Do not pick up the phone after 3 a.m. no matter how many times it rings." I looked up, confused. "Is this a joke?" I asked, trying to smile. But his face didn't change. He looked at me calmly and said, "It's important." I didn't ask more, not wanting to sound scared or stupid. But when I went to bed that night, I left the note on the kitchen table where I could see it from my room. The first night was normal. I made dinner, sat in the living room, watched some random TV show, then checked the doors and made sure everything was locked. The note was still on the kitchen table. I glanced at it a few times but didn't think much of it. The house was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I was tired enough not to care. The second night felt the same. Nothing strange happened. But the third night was different. I woke up suddenly around 2:45 a.m. Not because of any sound, but because the air felt colder, like I was outside without a jacket. I sat up in bed. My room was dark, but I could see a bit of light from the kitchen window. And then, it started. The phone on the kitchen wall began ringing, loud and sharp. It was the kind of sound that didn't feel normal in a quiet house like this. I sat on my bed without moving, my mind completely blank for a few seconds. Then, I slowly remembered the note, the only rule Mr. Allen gave me. I sat there, staring at my door, knowing the kitchen was just a few steps away. But I didn't move. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Then, suddenly, silence. I waited a few more minutes before slowly lying back down. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone. It looked normal now, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I heard. So, I told myself I wouldn't stay another night. But I also needed the money, and only 2 more days were left. That night, I stayed in bed, wide awake. I didn't turn off the lights. I kept checking the clock every few minutes. My heart was already beating fast as it got closer to 3 a.m. And then, it started. The sound felt like it was inside my head. Then, suddenly, it stopped. But before I could feel safe, it rang again. Without thinking, I stood up and walked to the kitchen, like something was pulling me. I picked up the phone. I didn't speak, but I heard a voice. It was my grandmother's voice, soft and calm, like when I was a child. But the words made my skin crawl. "Why are you in my house? Why are you sleeping in my bed?" I dropped the phone. The kitchen felt colder now. Not normal cold, but the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones. I didn't sleep that night. Again, when morning came, I left the keys on the table. I didn't wait for payment. I didn't call Mr. Allen. I didn't care. I walked out without looking back. I never found out who or what was on the other end of that phone, and I don't want to know.